Welcome back to Synthesis. I'm Emily Sicorsi.
And I'm Justin Foster.
And you're going to meet our guests in a minute. But first, thanks for joining us at Synthesis. So Synthesis is a Root and River hosted webcast that brings together some nonconformist leaders with us. And it's an opportunity for us to really dive into their ideas that have made them see the world differently. And they've given us the opportunity to also see the world a little bit differently. So this webcast is really a discussion about all of those ideas and an opportunity to enter the world of nonconformist leadership thinking. And we're really excited to have our guests with us today. They are Triana Newton and Doug McRae, and they are the co-founders of Claritee. And at Claritee, they believe the most undervalued leadership competency is simplicity. So they're going to talk to us today. We're going to have a conversation about simplicity in and of itself and our addiction to complexity. But first, a little bit more about them. They're amazing, intelligent, thoughtful, high EQ, highly driven individuals that Justin and I, have been lucky enough to count as supporters of Root and River and friends. And Triana's background, she spent 26 years in working with businesses across the globe, really, in organizational transformation and management consulting. Spent a good number of those years with the Dale Carnegie organization and had the honor, I think, of traveling and working around the world, which is one of the things that I love about her. She brings this global perspective to organizational transformation and just to the people aspect of it, about why people change and when they need a little bit of a kick in the pants. Tree is the person, I think, to do that in a really powerful and respectful way too. And then Doug, who has one of the biggest hearts, I think, of anyone I know, and matched that with an amazing intellect as well. He spent much of his career practicing industrial and organizational psychology and understanding what drives people and the way they behave and how to bring those to light in their mind, and then how to bring that together at an organizational scale. I've known Doug for a few years, and he's always been somebody who inspires me, inspires, I think, Justin and I to continue what we're doing at Root and River, because he sees the big whole of people and business and how that can work together to serve the greater good. So without further ado, welcome Tree and Doug.
Thank you so much. We're
glad
to join you today.
And we love, there's an extra thing we love about you guys, in that you are a duo, we're a duo. And so any chance that we can get to observe how other duos operate with similar dynamics that we have, you're an inspiration to us that way as well. So thank you for that.
Well,
same back.
Yeah, very much so.
Awesome.
And really, that means like we don't feel so weird anymore.
You have company.
We can share our weirdness with you.
Exactly.
So we like to, in Synthesis, kind of start by going way back. And so I want to throw out the question. I'll begin with you, Tree. So I want to go kind of deeper into the person and ask you, what is your most lasting memory, the one that stayed with you the longest of childhood?
I think it's Saturday mornings with my dad. Nobody was up. We would always get up early on Saturdays, and that was the time that we debated, you fix the world. He was a police detective, so we worked through his cases. We solved all of the problems out there and debated life in general. And it was kind of my time to exercise my brain, but it was also just a great time that he and I had to engage like that. So I remember my Saturday mornings with him.
That's beautiful.
Cool.
Yeah.
What about for you, Doug? Your most lasting memory of childhood?
I was a farm kid, and because of family stuff and whatever, I pretty much had to use my imagination to entertain myself, because that's the way it was. We had the animals and we had all that kind of stuff, but whatever I did to entertain myself came from within. It didn't come so much from without. There was other kids around, you know, it's farming community, and we got together, but a lot of it was internal. And the other side of me was, I remember anything that was broken, I would tear it apart and fix it. Neighbors' lawnmowers, toasters, mix masters, TVs, including almost electrocuting myself a few times. Literally, if it's broken, and I'm still that way, whether it's in the business world or the mechanical world, if it's broken, I cannot resist tearing it apart and trying to fix it. Just can't resist.
That is so you.
That makes a lot of sense. And it's interesting to me, there's a thread between those two answers of, you know, Tree really digging into your dad's cases and trying to solve mysteries, and Doug digging into mechanical mysteries and trying to unravel those. How interesting. Yeah.
So what a perfect segue to another question we want to ask, which is, you know, each of us are immersed as children into traditional roles, religious practices, or lack thereof, whatever it might be for your experience. So this is kind of a two-parter, and we'll start with you, Tree, on this. Is what traditional roles were you and religious practices were you immersed in? And then when did you realize that some of them or all of them weren't for you?
So I don't know if I had a lot of traditional roles, because back when we were the odd family. My grandparents, both of them had careers, my grandmother and my grandfather. My mom had a career. She always worked, as did my dad. So we were the odd family, because most of the area that I grew up in, rural area, there was a stay-at-home mom that was doing things. And I never had that sort of model to work from. So there wasn't a lot of, if you want to say, traditional approach. The other thing is we were British, fairly recent to Canada. So there was you were sort of, again, you were sort of out of the mix of traditional things there, because we got a British culture, our family brought over, and you're trying to sort of work your way into Canadian society at that point. So we were kind of quirky. And then there's the whole cultural thing, sort of some differences in just, you know, British practices versus Canadian. So we were pretty quirky. So when you say traditional, I don't know that we were immersed really.
Cool.
Maybe dipped slightly, but not no immersion.
Yeah.
And the religious practices is interesting as well, because my families, they were atheists, which most British families are brought up Anglican, but very, very practical, scientific approach to the world that way. So I was brought up with that, though in my Saturday morning time with my dad, we explored all the religions, and he actually encouraged me to go out and study all the different religions and find any that might suit my way I thought the world was organized. And that was a really cool experiment. It took me, you know, everything from Buddhism to the Quran to all sorts of some obscure religions. And so it actually, I guess, helped me distill down the practices or guiding practices or principles that I thought made sense in the world. At the time, it wasn't, you know, I didn't take it as seriously. And now I understand what a life lesson came out of that. Really sort of a foundational piece.
That's interesting.
How beautiful that he encouraged you to do that. That knowing you took it all the way. Yeah.
And that this idea of nonconformity that synthesis is all about was something that was fostered in you early on. So that's fascinating. How about you, Doug?
I think I've shared this with you before, but highly dysfunctional family. And so not a lot of what I would call high quality, you know, sort of guidance, direction, roles, that sort of thing internally. And I think what I did was I looked beyond that then to neighbors, you know, and we didn't have a huge number of neighbors, but we had some. And some of my neighbors' families, although they were all different, they were more what I would call normal. And so I think I wound up taking lessons from a lot of other places about what I want in the future, despite the fact that I wasn't sort of getting it in my own world. And I think I still do that. I think I still examine whatever's out there with, I don't know that it's a neutral bias, but I think I really examine what's out there and try to take the best in what I see out there, because I really never felt that I was on an absolute rock solid platform for years and years and years and years and years. And I maybe still don't. You know, it still maybe is one of the reasons why I'm so stupid curious about it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, religious wise, the big drivers in our community was a huge Catholic school that we interacted with. I didn't go to the Catholic school, but we interacted with it. And the Anglican church up the street that everybody in the community went to. And it didn't really matter, you know, you were either Catholic or Anglican, even if you weren't Anglican, because that was the church that was there that you could go to, unless you wanted to drive 25 miles to the next nearest church. And so that was, you know, a community gathering spot and that sort of thing. But I don't consider myself an Anglican today. I'm not sure really what I consider myself.
Doug.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
I think there's this interesting idea there of being like finding your own place to belong, you know, going outside of the nuclear family to find, or the family of origin, to find your own place to belong. But also, and I see this in you today, your ability to find a way to be a part of something bigger and take the good parts, and also maybe stand in your own space a little bit.
Yeah, I do kind of do that.
Well, and you're seeing, both of you, in the work that you do now, which we'll get into more in a minute, but the work that you do now is there's this massive shift away from this industrial age approach to things that requires some healthy skepticism and some open-mindedness and these things that your circumstances honed over the years have perfectly positioned you as leaders, or thought leaders, conversation changers, that type of thing, in this current world that we live in, which is kind of an upheaval right now. So I think that's fascinating. You're very well equipped for it. I once observed to someone that I told them that they were the only person that brought the can opener to the picnic. So that's a special place to be, and that's kind of what you guys are. You know, your experience. You're the one that brought the can opener to the picnic.
Usually the wine cork, but
yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Generally.
So, you know, I think it's a Mark Twain quote, right? 2 most important days of your life: the day you're born and the day you find out why. So in Synthesis, we're really interested in when you found your path, or when it either when you found your path and how you found it, or when you realized the path that you would take would be different, would be maybe more of a nonconformist path. So we'll start with you, Tree, on that one.
Okay. Yeah, you know, you talk about having a feeling about something, and if I felt like I was not a conformist, I was early. I was very young, and it even started with the fact that I had a name that nobody else ever had. So it was a different name, and everybody sort of looked at you like, "Where'd you get that name?" And it sort of created a bit of an identity on its own, that you were different because your name was different. And I remember that sense of self early on, and that sort of continued to manifest itself as I got into, you know, school and business and everything else, where I was always the one where I would be asking the sort of the contrarian point of view, or why does it work this way? I was kind of Doug's version of, you know, fixing the toaster. I was trying to peel the toaster apart and get to the guts. So it was interesting, because as a kid, I was conformist. I was a cop's daughter. So I didn't break rules, but I would be the one sitting there going, well, that rule's kind of stupid for that reason and that reason. And I'd have very healthy debates on it with teachers, which didn't go so well, because that's not the environment to have those debates. But to me, it was really clear why those things were or were not. So it was pretty young that I felt it was nonconformist. And that was just sort of reconfirmed as I went into business, when, you know, you're sitting around the table and everybody is sort of really focused on this, you know, they've gotten caught up in the minutia And I would just see patterns differently. And I would just sort of say, well, yeah, okay, well, why not that? And everybody would look at me like, and then they'd go back and they'd be working on the minutia again. And then I would try again to sort of say, well, what about that? Because for me, the pattern was really clear. And I guess what I came to understand is it is that ability sometimes that the pattern is fairly clear and obvious to me in a company or in a business or in a problem setting. And yet it's not necessarily for others, or they need to be facilitated into getting to that problem or issue or point. And that's kind of what has emerged in my very, very crazy and you couldn't have planned it out career.
I love that, seeing patterns differently. I think that's a really great self-awareness that you have, and it's very true in my experience. What about you, Doug? When did you know?
Wow. Young age. Got to get a job, got to earn money so I can, frankly, get the heck out of here. Got to get a job, got to get money so I can be independent, so I can live my own life. That's being so work hard, bust your butt, never back off, there's just no option. And I was very, very lucky. Got a job in a sawmill when I was 14, and worked there part-time, made really good money and that sort of thing. And a whole bunch of stories around that. But that's one side of it is, the job, work hard, make money, be independent, whatever. The other side of it was, I remember thinking as a kid, knowledge is power. Knowledge is power. Knowledge is power. And so on the school side, quite a number of subjects were very difficult for me, but I was absolutely determined to do the work because knowledge is power. And so even though it was tough, I was a very good achieving math student, but math was really difficult for me. And, so that whole thing, work hard, make money, and knowledge is power. I think of knowledge differently today, very, very, very differently. I think of it in terms of what I can do to help others through, what I know and how I think and experiences, and what I can, talking with Justin this morning about gaining more knowledge. I don't think of it as knowledge as power anymore so much, but those still are the two core things is, be proactive, work your butt off, and know everything that you need to know to be effective.
Yeah, I grew up on a ranch, Doug, so I get that. And also within a similar environment, it sounds like. And it's interesting how those biases stay with you, even if you have this conscious awareness they're unnecessary. So like for me, the idea that if it's daylight, you're working.
Yeah.
That's what you do. It wasn't until years went by that I realized that pretty much every afternoon, unless we were working cattle, which was an all-day thing, if it was haying season or irrigation season, my grandfather would take a nap every afternoon. And so but I didn't notice that part. I just noticed the work ethic part of it. So I get that. So those are such awesome answers. And so we'll dig into this other idea. So as you begin to go into what would be considered your professional career, so not your first jobs out of college necessarily, but moving into this area of specialty that you had, where did you start? Where'd you get in trouble? Like what was this nonconformist or this and sort of tinkering, antagonizing worldview or mindset? And we'll start with you, Tree. Where did you get in trouble in your career where you got maybe admonished or a talking to?
Well, that's been a fairly consistent pattern.
Why you're on here.
Yeah, the first part of my career was with McDonald's restaurants in Canada, and I was on the corporate side with them and did restaurant operations and then training. And so very rigid environment, right? Very structured environment, which is something that made it successful, but it also helped you, it was also a great environment for learning, if you want to call it the influence of people, and more leadership, leadership oriented things. That was a good learning ground there. But for me, where I first got into trouble there was you're trying to interrupt a machine. It's a franchise model, it's a system and everything else. And you're trying to interrupt that by saying, I think there's a different way. So early on, you started to understand when it was appropriate to bring those up, which was almost never, and learn to hold on to it. And then I guess it also started to force you to consider, how do you engage people or enroll, rather than just stating it, but how do you enroll people in it, or how do you have them experience it, or how do you have them come to that conclusion on their own? How do you make a circumstance happen that people experientially would say, yeah, that's what we should do? So I learned that it wasn't asserting, it was engaging. And so that was I bashed my head against the wall a number of times, got into trouble a number of times there on that, but I think it also gave me some lessons. And the other place was Carnegie, which was a constant, again, you're taking a very old brand, well-represented brand, some amazing work done by Mr. Carnegie. But as you're trying to build the enterprise over time, in a lot of cases, we were taking a very North American, if not American focused organization globally. And you were trying to make that work, and you had to really bust a lot of traditional conventional thinking. So it was a pretty, monthly occasion where there would be something where I had gone out, done it, and was begging forgiveness later. Do a lot of that. So you just get used to saying, yep, you're right, I own that, thank you.
Yeah, like the corporate version, I want you to sit there and think about what you've done.
Yeah.
How about you, Doug?
I think early on, I figured out it was easier to be forgiven than to get permission. And for some, and I'm not sure it was always the smartest thing in the world to do, but for some reason, time after time after time, people would say that something couldn't be done. Somehow or another, 100 ways it could come at you, but, this would be nice, but it can't be done. And I'd be the idiot in the room who would say, I'll do it. And what comes with that is sometimes it can rain rather unpleasant material, and other times it's better. But I really don't know how I wound up doing that, but I guess the nice words around it are pioneering or whatever. If there was an opportunity to do something different that hadn't been done before, that everybody else figured was impossible, somehow or another, I'd volunteer. And then over the years, it got so I wasn't volunteering, I was being volunteered. Every time there was one of those things. And ultimately, maybe one of the biggest privileges of my life was that I wound up leading or coaching a team of 17 people who were very, very much just like me. They were, many of them had been fired by the department heads that they had worked with, but we didn't want to lose them, so we put them on my team. And we had people, and I won't go into the long explanation, but in $1 million world, we had people producing 17 million and 14 million. Really, really unusual thinkers, quirky people, very, very different, very, very difficult to coach. You could not manage them, but you could maybe coach them some. And Triana knows, I still look back on those days fondly as probably the greatest growth I ever had, because those people were so insanely unusual. But what a privilege, and I learned so much, and we accomplished so much. We literally had a whole team of people doing what most of the rest of the world thought was impossible, and it was such a hoot. And truly, and Triana knows this too, probably if I could go back to those days, it's impossible, but if I could, if circumstances had remained the way that they were in the heyday, I'd probably still be there and still just absolutely loving it. You know, and that's probably, it's probably what drives most of my client work today, is the same sort of appreciation of unusual people with interesting ideas and quirky skills, making stuff happen that nobody else can do. I just love that.
Yeah, I really relate to that. Some of my happiest times are leading quirky teams like that, and just bringing everyone to the table and really diving into all their differences and making it work together. And I love that.
It's that creating thing. I think we both, well, we all four of us wind up, you know, it's you got to be creating something.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've been weird and alone, and I've been weird with a weird group. Weird group, way better.
Oh yeah.
So as you're both kind of going through, you're sticking your neck out, you're asking for forgiveness as you go along and try your own things and use the information that you've gathered, seeing your own patterns, your own way, or finding the way to talk to the weird people. And you're still probably running into a lot of contradictions in your work and in the world, and some paradoxes. So we're curious about what those were, like the brick walls that you kept running into, maybe over and over, and why they seem so agitating or contradictory for you. And maybe that has kind of led to what you're doing now, but just ask, what were those contradictions or brick walls that you ran into? And Doug, we'll start with you.
One of my favorite terms that we developed together recently, smokestacks, that, you know, the whole idea of smokestack thinking, that you run into people who legitimately, you know, in their favor, maybe just don't have the energy to do something different. You know, maybe it's just not there. It's not part of their makeup. May not have the drive to do something different, may enjoy things the way that they are, and that sort of thing. But we run into a tremendous volume of sort of old school or smokestack thinking.
Can you give me an example of what smokestack thinking is, or give me a little bit more on that?
Sure. Traditional business models today really grew up in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, into the 70s, into the 80s, unfortunately somewhat into the 90s. But really, when you take a look at you know, a lot of the core methodologies that are used today, even though they're sort of polished up nice, you know, the PowerPoint slides look really good. You know, it all looks really cool in a brochure, and the graphics people have done a marvelous job of making this all look new. And, you know, people with a thesaurus are, you know, looking up big yuppie words to rename things from the 30s. But an awful lot of the thinking that we deal with today is really old style management thinking, where you put layer upon layer upon layer upon layer of complexity on things, thinking that you're going to create a better organization.
Okay.
And, you know, Triana's way better at explaining this than me, but we just, we've seen that, done that, participated in it, been on the sidelines, watching it, being part of it, being around it, and whatever. For so long, we just know it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And that's why we, you know, I'm not trying to create an advertising here, but that's why we created Claritee. Is really, you know, Triana's words are, we're fed up and we just can't take it no more. Because there is a different way. It's a very, very fundamental, you know, it's like coming to you guys for a root session. You know, it's a very, very different fundamental way of looking at things and thinking. And we really do believe we've found the key to sort of turn that around for people that are so minded. No criticism of what's gone on in the past, because I think most people that we work with are very well-meaning. You know, they want to do good, they want to do the right thing. They just don't see a different path, because most of what's pushed at them is this. And so literally we've set ourselves up to go head to head with almost every management theory there is. Um, there's an initial thought anyway.
Yeah.
So you're saying you don't have a quadrant that you're trying to get people to fit into?
Do we have a quadrant we're trying to? No.
On your train.
We do, really, actually.
I know, but I'm teasing
Yeah,
you.
organizational simplicity. That's
Yeah,
where
yeah, that's
we
true.
go. We really do.
So Tree, when you ran into Smokestack thinking, if that's what you would, term it as well, what did that look like? What did the leadership look like, or the habits look like around that?
Well, I think a lot of times it was, Doug started to mention things like it's an addiction to complexity, really, I think in a lot of cases, because as the world starts moving in different ways, I think people perceive that everything is changing so quickly. Our world is complicated. And I think if you read newspapers 15 years ago, 20 years ago, 100 years ago, they did too. But we're in what we're in right now. And I think people feel the world is incredibly complex. And so they're feeling that if it's a complex world, my solution to how to respond to that's got to be complex too. Mm-hmm. So we find people and businesses searching then to a model that is going to help them break out of that. But they think it has to be, it's going to be a complex solution. So you see people, you see the result of Smokestack thinking and saying, well, this is the traditional structure that we have to have, or we have to do strategies this way, or we need to organize our company this way. And probably the biggest fallacy in all this is, I think, Smokestack thinking has people thinking, the systems are going to save us. Mm. If I have systems in place, the systems will do it. The structure will do it. As soon as we have roles and job responsibilities sorted out, everything's going to be fine. And so they keep hearkening back to that traditional thinking as a way to solve a now and a future problem. And I guess what we're saying is, quite frankly, that, and some people like that. They're just caught up in that cycle where they can't break that addiction to complexity. And in fact, they think they're not doing a good job as a leader unless they are immersed in complexity. And we're sort of on the other side of the fence saying, actually, if you can strip those layers away, sort of remove those restrictions, then your organizational flow will be better. Mm-hmm. And you are now creating a model that doesn't have to fit into a box from the past. You're creating something that serves you for now. And probably the essence of that is what we call our core beliefs engineering, where we really sort of get rid of vision and mission and ask organizations, we help them identify and really dig into their core beliefs, who they are to the world, to the market, to their clients, to themselves, shareholders, all of that, but really, really dig into that and find their purpose, and then really assemble and unify everybody around those core beliefs. Things get a lot easier after that. But from in terms of resistance or contrarian views on that, of course, you come up with against Big C Consulting, who sort of built a model. There's people out there doing fabulous work, but they have built a model on a long-term relationship with the client by keeping them in a complex cycle. And I guess Doug and I've seen the work that you guys do too. I guess we're kind of trying to liberate. We're trying to lose clients almost. We're trying to help them get to the point where this is self-sustaining and the organization runs. We love, we want to make money at it and a livelihood, but we probably give more than we should, with the idea that if we can get our clients to that level of simplicity, they've got a long-term sustainable model. And it's kind of counter to the way traditional consulting works. So we certainly run into some people looking at us quizzically that way, as well as the idea that we're saying, simplicity is the answer, not complexity.
Beautifully said by both of you. And a great segue in kind of this next question that we wanted to ask you, which is, you are, like we are, helping leaders transition from the old world of complexity and systems first to this new world of simplicity and humans first. And we do that with our version of that in the realm of branding and marketing. You guys do it within organizational development, leadership development. So a nonconformist question to ask here is, who do you not work with? What kind of human, what kind of leader should stay away?
Doug, you want to tackle that one first? You have your good phrase.
You can name names if you want. That'll help.
Yeah.
No, don't do that.
The organizations that are there absolutely purely with what I believe to be low ethics and low morals, they are there purely for the purpose of churning cash and doing whatever they need to do that. You know, and it's maybe a bad example to use, but you know, it came up in 2007, 2008 in the investment community, where literally the only interest those people had was their $2 million or $3 million bonus. And they didn't care what they did to society. They didn't care about, you know, for example, the family that I know of in Florida who both had good jobs and whatever, but they bought a house at the wrong time and they ended up losing everything they had and having to move to Philadelphia to live in the basement of her parents' house because of what these investment people did. Organizations like that, maybe it's the wrong word, but they have no soul. You know, they have no depth. They're there for one purpose. Those organizations are not for us. And don't get me wrong. This is not.
They call us tomorrow.
It's not an anti-profit statement.
Sure.
I'm not for profitability, but there has to be another reason for existing. And if there is no other reason for existing, then they're probably not for us. Triana?
Well, I mean, if we talk about the Claritee approach rooted with core beliefs, and so if you got an organization that doesn't have core beliefs, or their main core belief of, you know, why they exist and, you know, how the world is going to be better because they're there is because we're going to make money. That's, you know, I think a great example where Doug's trying to talk about organizations maybe lacking intention or soul. So those organizations are not going to look at us. Those organizations who are, you know, feel that they that their whole business model is rooted in complexity are probably not ready for this journey. I think we're best suited for, Doug calls them the get-its. They're the business people and leaders out there that they've been on the hamster wheel. They understand they're on a hamster wheel. They have said, okay, I need to get off the hamster wheel. And I've tried many different ways to do that. And, you know, I've done all the, you know, the flavor of the month stuff. I've talked to other consultants. I've done all these things. I'm ready for something radically different. And sometimes that's a significant event that's created it, you know, and it was the camel's back was broken at that moment. And that's why they needed to look for something radically different. I think sometimes the market has pushed people to that point where they feel that they're just in constant catch up to a market. And then they're saying, okay, I'm ready to make a radical change. So we usually need people, the get-its, that are ready to make a radical change, but it's got to be a principled organization. Otherwise, the core beliefs piece just has no, you know, it's incredibly powerful and unifying to an organization when you get it lined up and they have their compass point north. It's not going to work for an organization that doesn't have a belief system or has a negative belief system, or one that's, you know, sort of not very substantive.
Awesome.
So using this idea of simplicity, I'm going to go in a little bit of a different direction. We always find it challenging in a very good way to take our own advice and be our own client. And that has been something that we've had to work at moments when we get either really busy or really slow, typically. So for you, and when has simplicity or a simple idea sort of changed the trajectory, or kind of when have you practiced simplicity, I guess is the question, and what impact has it made on your own life or your work for each of you? Triana, maybe start with you.
So I guess the most recent version of that was when I was with Carnegie, and you're taking a 105-year-old organization who has a very tradition-centered model. But a lot of what Carnegie did, obviously their main go-to-market was the delivery, their training. And over the years, it had gotten to the point where you know, if you want to call it your product going out to market, you know, it needs to be the best product it can be. It was what the company was built on, but it got watered down and diluted over the years. So one of the things we, you know, as you're trying to come out of that, there was an incredibly complex trainer development model. There was all of these things that went along with it. There was a very, very protracted process. And there was a belief that, it was going to take 3 years to build a good trainer, because they can't even walk by that time. And we busted that up and sort of said, okay, this is what we want at the end. What is our fastest and most effective way to get there? So we took a simplicity and essentialism approach and basically remapped the way to create that trainer. And we had an opportunity to roll that out. And that was, we actually called it the WOW project at the time, but it was really stripping down in a way all those systems and policies, procedures, and rigidity, and was looking for what is just the essence of what we need that's going to get us to where we want to go, and don't overcomplicate it. And at the end, we got the result we wanted.
That's great. What about for you, Doug? When has simplicity saved your behind?
I think one of the sort of origin pieces for me was way back when, with an organization called Claritee, we had an opportunity to, and we had, we got to a point, we grew to a point where we had the money. We had an opportunity to create the 70-pound operations manual. And, we had the ability to hire the lawyers, to hire the consultants and whatever, and create the book of how things ran. And it wasn't me, I was part of the team, but it wasn't me that came up with the idea. But we came up with the idea that if we could guide the thinking of people rather than cause regulation for people, maybe we could do it a different way. And so in that world, and it will sound silly, but this sort of inspired me afterwards. We came up with, and you can do a Google search on it, the aims of Claritee. And I did it just to make sure it was still available up there. There's 7 aims. And what we said to our whole team was that in any action that you do, whether it's with an employee, whether it's with a customer, whether it's with a supplier, whether it's, deciding how to approach any problem that you've got, if you read those 7 aims and what you're doing is consistent with that, then you're going to be okay. And we're going to back you up. Even if what you do is maybe the quirkiest darn thing any of us ever heard about, and if half of us think it was a really, really strange solution, if you are consistent with those, you're okay. We'll back you up. And what happened, and I have a favorite story, but I won't go into it today, is our people literally took that literally. And so in the middle of winter, with 4 feet of snow on the ground, and a customer hung up, something couldn't be done. And it's 2 o'clock in the morning in the middle of December, and our service person is freezing their tail off. We actually, my favorite story, one of our guys looked at the back of one of our invoices and read what those aims said. And then he phoned me, and we made something happen. I'll be proud till the day I die of that on many fronts. One is he didn't have to look through a 3,000-pound operations manual. All he had to do was understand what we were trying to do as an organization. He made a decision, and it turned out beautiful, just beautiful, very strange, but just a beautiful thing. And it was because, Triana and I have talked extensively about this. This is one of my finest examples of simplicity. Doing things at this level so that you don't need to do it with a 70-pound operations manual. So that's probably kind of a turning point. But there's from there, there's a million other examples of that kind of thing.
Yeah, like you didn't need vision and mission to organize people that way. Right. And I know that's heresy to say that, but how many vision and mission statements are sitting up on a wall and nobody knows about them? whereas you had, you know, these aims or beliefs that everybody could organize around, and they understood the intention and they were, you know, devoted to those. It makes it a lot simpler to decide what the right thing is to do. And
Yeah.
So I can imagine someone that does want to work with you and does fit the profile of who you're looking for. You know, if you were to talk to them about this transition from complexity to simplicity, you probably get a lot of head nodding, sort of surface agreement. Yeah, sure, simplicity is a great idea. But we know this about change in organizations or communities or the world, which is change doesn't happen because they change. Change happens because I change. So what are some of the most difficult habits that you think leaders struggle to change in order to infuse more simplicity into their lives and businesses?
I think we're certainly, I think you mentioned it earlier, we've made this transition from more of a management-driven culture to more of a person-driven, you know, leadership oriented culture. Thankfully, a more human culture.
Right.
In doing that, so the people, you know, the leaders that I think are ready to do this kind of journey, understand that this, you know, systems are not going to save them anymore. They maybe recognize that they're addicted to complexity, or have, you know, seen the warning signs and said, I'm ready for a radical change. I'm ready to get off the hamster wheel. I'm ready to do something differently. And I think they also understand and value the human equation of this, because this is all driven on relationship. And I'm not going to use the word authentic anymore, because I used to use it and now everybody's using it, so it's not authentic anymore. But I'll say substantive and genuine, meaningful relationships have to happen in organizations. And so leaders who understand that value and are really committed to that, you know, those are the type of people that are probably going to understand where this could take them. Those that are recognizing that, you know, you can't do this through the rearview mirror. We have a future that could unfold minute by minute. You know, nobody's going to predict the market 5 years from now, right?
Right.
But something where they said, because of how we're organized as a company and how we're not traditionally organized, and how we've created, you know, we're open to creating a new model so that we can be agile enough to deal with whatever comes, because we can't predict it necessarily, but at least we can respond to it. So those leaders who understand that, you know, our future is probably going to be, you can't necessarily, you know, people talk about making it happen. I think we're going to be more in response mode in many industries, because we just don't know, you know, another change in technology and things change overnight. Right. So it's the people in those situations and with those thoughts and conditions, I think, and mindsets, where this would really, where clarity and organizational simplicity would really serve them well. And they're ready to take their organization on that journey.
Okay, great. Doug?
I think of the whole, you know, you raise the issue of change, and change is a huge challenge for people, a huge challenge. Some simply cannot cope. I think of what we're trying to do as a metamorphosis for an organization, that we start something in a very, very small, very small corner of the organization. We go after a very, very small kernel, and we get that dealt with. We get, a very small thing that becomes a very big thing in the future, but we get it dealt with, and then we just move on in a very, very logical way, fine-tuning or tweaking, if you like, many, many, many things, because you can't float a ship stern first, bow later, or you can't tie the bow down and float the stern. If you float one end of the ship before the other, ultimately it'll fill with water and it'll sink. So we've got to float the boat evenly, but it's got to be done at the pace that the organization can absorb it. And it is such a people-oriented thing, because people ultimately until babies are born with chips in their brains. You know, people ultimately are making this stuff happen in an organization. So we take it's not really a slow drip, but it's a bit of a slow drip approach to the whole process, but in a very, very logical way that as it unfolds, I think people naturally like it. You know, they see some progress and they go, oh, this is kind of cool. And then it leads into the next logical thing and the next logical thing. And we've seen signs where doing this, the simplicity side of it shows up really early. You know, people see signs of it really quickly, and that creates a little enthusiasm. And sometimes I catch myself actually slowing people down and saying, you know, if we hit you guys with this too hard, too fast, and whatever, you know, we might get the double-handed pushback. But we can do it. So we think a little longer term, you know, not 20 years and, you know, not 3 generations or anything, but we think a little longer term, little slower drip, and doing this I don't like using the word organic because it's another one of those words like Tree was talking about, everybody's using it, but in a very, very natural way. You know, I'm not trying to advertise for you, but a lot of what we talked about in the root session, just so true of what we experience too.
It's like inviting people to join your cause or your movement, I think.
Yeah.
You know, like,
Definitely.
From a language standpoint, I know what you mean when you're like other people are starting to use it, but you know what's fun is to take it back, to take back a word like brand and just redefine it. And so I think it's okay to say organic and authentic. It's especially okay when inorganic and unauthentic people use that term and you can challenge them. So.
All right, on.
amplified.
Well, as we come full circle, and this has just been such a good discussion, but as we come full circle, we have one last question for you. So the definition of synthesis that we like to use is a combination of diverse concepts that once they're brought together, bring a higher level of truth. So what's one truth that guides you or has guided you in your life and work?
I'll let Doug go. He looked like he was going to respond.
Oh no! It just plunged me into deep soul searching. Oh wow!
So I'll let you soul search for a minute. You can, or have you got it?
Go ahead, Tree. Go ahead.
No, I know when when you put the thing truth on there, it puts a lot of gravity to it. But I think there's a truth when we're talking about sort of the human element of this. I think my life has been one of building communities and connecting people wherever I went, and I don't know why it happens. It just happens, and it's part of my DNA. So I think the recognition that we are in an era where the substance and the understanding and the engagement and the caring and the intentions around people and how we work and not only work but as a community, as a world, that if we could keep our focus on that, I think tells us that we've got a chance for the future. The moment we abandon that, I think we're back into we're going to get ourselves in trouble. So you could say people centric, but I think it's about the relationships and the community we are, and being a part of that together.
Thank you, Doug.
Leadership is not about me. Leadership is about others. Everything about leadership is about others. Coaching is about others. And that's ultimately what we do. Triana and I are driven, by some sort of weird set of drivers that come from us, but we really are driven to be in service and lead and try to make some real improvements in the world, in a world where so many business, CEOs, presidents, owners are frustrated. They're unhappy. They're not, they started off with a dream and they're not achieving the dream. The business has not turned out to be what they want it to do. It's turned out to be a drudge on a day-to-day basis instead of the culmination of everything they wanted. And to me, we have an opportunity because we think we figured this out, to be the leader and the coach to help organizations come back to what they dreamt about when they first started what they did. Or with some of the CEOs that I've read about, some of them that do come with a heart and a soul to an organization. They're there and they're really trying to do some great things in addition to making money.
Sure.
And
or
I
as
believe
a
our
byproduct
purpose,
of doing great things. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And I think our purpose is to be the leaders and coaches to help them realize their dreams, because it's not if we do that, we'll achieve our dream. If we help them achieve theirs, we'll achieve ours. And I think that's ultimately what it's about.
Wonderful.
Is that okay?
That's
So
beautiful.
So we've come to the end of our time. As always with any of our guests and our friends, it's just one of those things. This could be I'm sort of jealous of Joe Rogan, the podcaster Joe Rogan, whose podcasts are 3 or 4 hours long. But alas, we're not doing that today. So we will put, for those of you who are watching this or listening, we will put how to learn more about what Doug and Tree are up to. We'll put some links in the description. And we always appreciate feedback from you. If you watch this and have some ideas or spark something, you can always just contact us through our website. And also, we love meeting other nonconformists. So if you are one and you're watching this and you think you might be a guest, or you have a friend that is a nonconformist and would be a good guest, just let us know. Because we want to continue this type of conversation with quality people like you guys. So thank you.
Thank you both for your thoughtful answers and for sharing this time with us and with our listeners and viewers today.
As always, when we spend time with you guys, we you get us a higher level of thinking.
Ditto.
Thank you.
Take care.
You too. Take care.